All right, in section 3.3, we are finding exact equations of polynomials, higher degree polynomials. Based on what we did last class, in the warm-up, we're taking a look at these, these polynomials and writing our basic equation. So if we look at that root, -3, the factor associated with that is x plus 3. It's a crossing root, so I don't need an exponent on it. That root is at 0, so that factor can just be x. And that root, but it's not just x because this comes up, flattens out a little, and goes up, so that needs to be x cubed, or some other odd number that's not 1. And then at x equals 2, that factor is going to be x plus 2. It's just a crossing root, so I don't need to put an exponent on it. Now, right here, the ending direction is down, which means at the front of this, I need to put a negative so that I recognize that that basic equation has a negative orientation. On the second one, I have a -3 again, so x plus 3 just crosses, so no exponent is needed. I have a -1, so x plus 1, also just crossing. And I have 2, so x minus 2. It's a bouncing root, so I'm going to square it. Ending direction is up, so I can just leave that as y equals. So that's my basic equation. That doesn't tell me a lot of specifics, but it gives me the general shape of the graph and what it should look like and what its end direction should be and how many roots, that kind of thing. So we start this section with just an algebra review. So if you're watching this for instructional purposes, I would take a moment, pause the video, and try this problem on your own where you are trying to solve for A. If you haven't paused and you're just continuing watching, we'll just go ahead and do that. So I know x equals 5, I know y equals 2025. So I do 2025 instead of y, drop down the a. Instead of x, I'm going to write 5, drop down the -6. Instead of x, I'm going to write 5, drop down the +4, and the squared. And then instead of x, write 5 again, and drop down the cubed. So then I need to simplify and solve. So I'm going to show every step in here. So 2025 equals a times -1, because 5 minus 6 is -1. 9 squared, because of the 5 plus 4. And then 5 cubed. So what I just did was everything in the parentheses. 2025 equals a times -1 times 81 times 125. So now, as I calculate that, -1 times 81 is -81. And then -81 times 125, give me just a second, is -10,125. So I drop down my a, in parentheses, -10,125. Those parentheses are pretty important to help you remember that you're multiplying a by that number and not subtracting it. If you leave the parentheses out, it looks like a minus 10,125, and then what happens is people add it to get rid of it, and that's not what you want to do. Remember, this is in factored or intercept form, so it's important that you recognize that everything on this side of the equation is being multiplied. So to get rid of anything, what you end up having to do is divide. So we're going to divide by -10,125. And should just pause the video while I'm doing this, but whatever. We get -0.2 or -1/5. So when we write out, we'll get to that part in a minute. So that's the algebraic process for solving for that. So if you were not in class, you missed a class activity wherein each of the groups had a graph with 1 point given to you, and you were asked to find the a value, find the exact equation. So I want to remind you how to do that. We did this back in Unit 1. This point right here is 62, 0. Here we were given the HK. So this point on the graph gave us an XY. Whoa, and I need to turn my volume down. So in order to find the exact equation, we took our general equation for a parabola, which is y equals a times x minus h squared plus k, and we took the numbers that we knew. So for y, we put in 0 because of that right there. So 0 equals a. For x, we put the 62 because of that right there. Minus h was 80, and that's from down there, squared, plus negative 35, or minus 35. And then you simplify. So 0 equals a, 62 minus 80 is negative 18, and then minus 35. So am I doing that math right? Yeah. So 0 equals a times 324, because I did the negative 18 squared. Add 35 to both sides. So I've got 35 equals a times 324. Divide both sides by 324. And we get some terrible decimal. Anyway, this one doesn't come out terribly lovely unless I made a mistake, which is entirely possible because I'm rather distracted, but you get the point. We plug in the parts that we know and we solve for the parts that we don't. So this was the group activity you were going to do if you were in class. Then we looked at some graphs and found the basic equation of them. So given that root right there and the fact that that's a flat root, that factor would be x plus 3 cubed. That's our other root at 4, so that is x minus 4 squared. That gives us our basic equation. Now, if we take that information, we add one piece of information, which is this xy value here, negative 212, then we can find the exact equation. So if I start with my basic equation, y equals a that we don't know, x plus 3 cubed times x minus 4 squared. Squared because at 4 we have a bouncing root. Cubed on the x plus 3 because at negative 3 we have a flat root. So now we know that x equals negative 2 and y equals 12. So just like we did with the parabola, we plug in what we know. So 12 for y, negative 2 for x, drop down everything else, and then simplify and solve. Not right. And I'm just showing every step in between here so people don't lose track of it. So now I have finally a times 36. Divide by 36 on both sides. 12 over 36 reduces to 1/3. And then I need to write my entire equation. So y equals 1/3 times x plus 3 cubed times x minus 4 squared. And that's an exact equation for that polynomial. So we'll do one more practice. Got the basic equation. So we'll look at that root, and that root. So this one, the factor associated, is going to be x plus 4 cubed. That particular root right there is just 0. It's just a crossing root, so that's just going to be x. And then that one right there at 6 is going to give us x minus 6. That's just a crossing root. We also know this is going to have a negative orientation, so if I were just writing the basic equation, I would put a negative. But at the next screen, I'm not going to put that negative, because if we do all our work correctly, everything should come out to a negative number. So now I have this new piece of information, the 2 and the 1296. These often end up being pretty big numbers, because when we start squaring and cubing things, numbers get really fast, or really big really fast. So we're going to put our a in there. Our first factor was x plus 4 cubed. Our second factor was just x. And our third factor, x minus 6. So if we plug in our 2 for x and our 1296 for y, we have 1296 equals a times 2 plus 4 cubed times 2 times 2, times 2 minus 6. So 1296 equals a times 6 cubed times 2 times negative 4. 6 cubed is a number I don't remember. 216. So 1296 equals a times 216 times 2 times negative 4. So 216 times 2 times negative 4 is a times negative 1728. So 1296 divided by negative 1728 is a negative 0.75, or negative 3/4. So our equation here, and it came out negative, which is good because our ending direction is going down, and so we need a negative a value. So negative 3/4, just because I like fractions better. X plus 4 to the third times x minus 6. And that is finding exact equations. So you have a practice worksheet to go with this, AA3-3. And that is it. So to up, we did this at the very end of the period. Write the basic equation. So you write the basic equation based on the roots and their types. Step 2 is to plug in your x and y values based on the point given. So you substitute the x and y values of the point given. Make sure that that's not one of your roots, because that will just make everything 0. The third step is to simplify and solve for a. And then your final step is to write your equation with your a value and your basic equation. So just rewrite the equation. So those are the basic steps. And really just take some practice, and it's not too tough. So that's all I have for you on that. Have a good day.